Today is January 30th. Welcome to Big Book Daily. My name is Rob. I am an alcoholic. It is a thrill and a joy to be here with you today as we are journeying through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 and 12. Yesterday, we were in the heart of Chapter 8, Two Wives. We read pages 105 and 110. Today, we'll be reading pages 110 through 114. We'll also be jumping into, we also just started step 5 yesterday, and we're going to make our way through that as well, pages 56 and 57. With all that, let's get to the big book. So if you recall from yesterday in Two Wives, we were talking about the destruction that alcoholism causes the entire family. And we also talked about 4 types of drinkers, and now we're going to kind of be talking about some of the solutions in dealing with the 4. So we'll be starting with the drinker number 1 here on page 110. Let's now go back to husband number 1. Oddly enough, he's often difficult to deal with. He enjoys drinking. It stirs his imagination. His friends feel him closer over a highball. Perhaps you enjoy drinking with him yourself when he doesn't go too far. You have passed happy evenings together, chatting and drinking before your fire. Perhaps you both like parties which would be dull without liquor. We have enjoyed such evenings ourselves. We had a good time. We know all about liquor as a social lubricant. Some, but not all of us, think that it has its advantages when reasonably used. The first principle of success is that you should never be angry. Even though your husband becomes unbearable and you have to leave him temporarily, you should, if you can, go without rancor. Patience and good temper are most necessary. Our next thought is that you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. If he gets the idea that you are a nag or a killjoy, your chance of accomplishing anything useful may be 0. He will use that as an excuse to drink more. He will tell you that he is misunderstood. This may lead to some lonely evenings for you. He may seek someone else to console him, and not always another man. Be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. They need your companionship and your help. It is possible to have a full and useful life, though your husband continues to drink. We know women who are unafraid, even happy under these conditions. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. You may be unable to do so no matter how hard you try. We know these suggestions are sometimes difficult to follow, but you will save many a heartbreak if you can succeed in observing them. Your husband may come to appreciate your reasonableness and patience. This may lead to the groundwork for a friendly talk about this alcoholic problem. Try to have him bring up the subject himself. Be sure that you are not critical during such a discussion. Attempt instead to put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. When a discussion does arise, you might read this book or at least a chapter on alcoholism. Tell him that you've been worried, though perhaps needlessly. You think he ought to know the subject better, as everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. Show him that you have confidence in his power to stop or moderate. Say that you do not want to be a wet blanket, that you only want him to take care of his health. Thus, you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. He probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintances. You might suggest that you both take an interest in them. Drinkers like to help other drinkers. Your husband may be willing to talk to one of them. If this kind of approach does not catch your husband's interest, it may be best to drop the subject. But after a friendly talk, your husband will usually revive the topic himself. This may take patient waiting, but it will be worth it. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. If you act upon these principles, your husband may stop or moderate. Suppose, however, that your husband fits the description of number 2. The same principles which apply to number 1 should be practiced. But after his next binge, ask him if he would really like to get over his drinking for good. Do not ask that he do it for you or anyone else. Just would he like to? The chances are he would. Show him your copy of this book and tell him what you have found out about alcoholism. Show him that, as alcoholics, the writers of the book understand. Tell him some of the interesting stories that you've read. If you think he will be shy of a spiritual remedy, ask him to look at the chapter on alcoholism. Then perhaps he'll be interested enough to continue. If he is enthusiastic, your cooperation will mean a great deal. If he's lukewarm or thinks he's not an alcoholic, we suggest that you leave him alone. Avoid urging him to follow our program. The seed has been planted in his mind. He knows that thousands of men, much like himself, have recovered. But don't remind him of this after he has been drinking, for he may be angry. Sooner or later, you are likely to find him reading the book once more. Wait until repeated stumbling convinces him that he must act. For the more you hurry him, the longer his recovery may be delayed. If you have a number 3 husband, you may be in luck. Being certain he wants to stop, you can go to him with this volume as joyfully as though you had struck oil. He may not share your enthusiasm, but he is practically sure to read the book and he may go for the program at once. If he does not, you will probably not have long to wait. Again, you should not crowd him. Let him decide for himself. Cheerfully see him through more sprees. Talk about his condition or this book only when he raises the issue. In some cases, it may be better to let someone outside the family present the book. They can urge action without arousing hostility. If your husband is otherwise a normal individual, your chances are good at this stage. You would suppose that men in the 4th classification would be quite hopeless, but that is not so. Many of Alcoholics Anonymous were like that. Everybody had given up. Defeat seemed certain. Yet, often such men had spectacular and powerful recoveries. There are exceptions. Some men have been so impaired by alcohol that they cannot stop. Sometimes there are cases where alcoholism is complicated by other disorders. A good doctor or psychiatrist can tell you whether these complications are serious. In any event, try to have your husband read this book. His reaction may be one of enthusiasm. If he is already committed to an institution, but can convince you and your doctor that he means business, give him a chance to try our method, unless the doctor thinks his mental condition is too abnormal or dangerous. We make this recommendation with some confidence. For years, we have been working with alcoholics committed to institutions. Since this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums and hospitals of every kind. The majority have never returned. The power of God goes deep. You may have the reverse situation on your hands. Perhaps you have a husband who is at large, but who should be committed. Some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. When they become too dangerous, we think the kind of thing is to lock them up. But of course, a good doctor should always be consulted. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves. But sometimes you must start life anew. We know women who have done it. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, their road will be smoother. If your husband is a drinker, you probably worry over what other people are thinking, and you hate to meet your friends. You draw more and more into yourself, and you think that everyone is talking about conditions at your home. You avoid the subject of drinking, even with your own parents. You do not know what to tell the children. When your husband is bad, you become a trembling recluse, wishing the telephone had never been invented. We find that most of this embarrassment is unnecessary. While you need not discuss your husband at length, you can quietly let your friends know the nature of his illness. But you must be on guard not to embarrass or harm your husband. When you have carefully explained to such people that he is a sick person, you will have created a new atmosphere. Barriers which have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear with the growth of sympathetic understanding. You will no longer be self-conscious or feel that you must apologize as though your husband were a weak character. He may be anything but that. Your new courage, good nature, and lack of self-consciousness will do wonders for you socially. Alright, lots of good stuff there, guys. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Alright, now we are in step 5. We're going to be on the bottom of page 56 and read most of 57. This practice of admitting one's defects to another person is, of course, very ancient. It has been validated in every century, and it characterizes the lives of all spiritually centered and truly religious people. But today, religion is by no means the sole advocate of this saving principle. Psychiatrists and psychologists point out the deep need every human being has for practical insight and knowledge of his own personality flaws, and for a discussion of them with an understanding and trustworthy person. So far as alcoholics are concerned, AA would go even further. Most of us would declare that without a fearless admission of our defects to another human being, we could not stay sober. It seems plain that the grace of God will not enter to expel our destructive obsessions until we are willing to try this. What are we likely to receive from step 5? For one thing, we shall get rid of that terrible sense of isolation we've always had. Almost without exception, alcoholics are tortured by loneliness. Even before our drinking got bad and people began to cut us off, nearly all of us suffered the feeling that we didn't quite belong. Either we were shy and dared not draw near others, or we were apt to be noisy good fellows craving attention and companionship but never getting it, at least to our way of thinking. There was always that mysterious barrier that we can neither surmount nor understand. It was as if we were actors on a stage, suddenly realizing that we did not know a single line of our parts. That's one reason we loved alcohol too well. It did let us act extemporaneously, but even back as boomeranged on us. We were finally struck down and left in terrified loneliness. Okay, guys, so while that is fresh, boy, that one really nails me to the T when they're talking about even before our drinking got bad and people began to cut us off, nearly all of us suffered that feeling that we didn't quite belong. Now, at least for me, in my early days of drinking, I always wrestled when I was a kid with low self-esteem and some insecurities. I don't know why, I don't know where they came from, and I'm not here to psychoanalyze. But when I first started drinking, that was the solution. It gave me that missing piece. I felt suddenly confident, suddenly social for like the first time in my life. And buddy, I had arrived. I felt so good. And then of course, over time, you start chasing that feeling, and it takes more and more alcohol to get there. And, obviously it would turn into something extremely unmanageable later on in my life. Then what do you do? Well, thankfully, by working these steps for me, I kind of gained that self-confidence back, but it's not in the cocky bravado way. It's more because I have peace and I can look the world in the eye now, and I don't hate myself so much. And I really give all credit to my higher power for that. I mean, it's just basically sobriety has given me a long-term higher quality of life where alcohol was just a cheap fix. Sobriety is like a steak where alcohol for me was that milkshake that turns on your stomach over time. So I don't know. That's a weird analogy, but there you go. That's free of charge. And then going back to wives real quick, I think it's great that once again, they kind of reinforce if you're in a negative or very, very unsafe situation, you got to get out of there. But also gives practical advice for every 4 of those drinkers, and suggests that the family that's closely knit with an alcoholic to work on their own spiritual journey as well. And that's the beautiful foundation of Al-Anon that can help so many families. So there is so much hope out there nowadays, guys. I mean, obviously this book was written in the 30s. And now we have a lot more modern technology and support groups. So there's definitely, no one has to face this alone. And thank God for that. And you know what's nice? I don't have to do this podcast alone. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for joining me in this lifeboat of recovery. And I hope you all have a great day. And I look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.